At 60, Pearl Hartwell had made her peace with the quiet. She had decided, with the calm certainty of a woman who has thought a thing all the way through, that love was something that had come to her once, long ago, and only briefly, and then gone, and that it was not, as a rule, the sort of thing that came around twice. She was wrong about that, as it turned out. She found it out the autumn evening the quiet widower from down the Juniper Hollow road took off his hat at her garden gate and asked, in a voice gone rusty with nerves, whether she might do him the honor of coming to. And somewhere in the second year, without either of them deciding it, the small courtesies between them began, very slowly, to change. It started with practical things, because they were both practical people. Walter, who'd never cooked a meal in his life until May died, was visibly going to seed on his own bad bachelor cooking, and Pearl, passing his place one day, found herself leaving a covered dish of stew on his porch with a note that said only, "No sense one person's leftovers going to waste." He returned the clean dish 2 days later with a sack of his good autumn apples and a note of his own in a careful hand. "Obliged. Best stew I've had since May." And there it might have stopped, 2 lonely neighbors trading dishes over a fence. Except that it didn't stop, because they began, without quite meaning to talk. He'd be mending a stretch of fence along the road when she passed, and they'd fall to talking, and a conversation that ought to have lasted 2 minutes would last 20 before either of them noticed. She found he was easy to talk to, quiet and dry, and kinder than she'd ever had cause to know in 30 years of nodding. He found that the spinster down the road, whom the valley had always treated as a fixture rather than a person, had a sharp wit and a deep stillness, and a way of listening that made a grieving man feel, for the first time in 2 years, less alone. They talked over the fence about the weather, and then about their gardens, and then, slowly, about harder things. About May, and about a young man named Thomas who died 40 years gone. Things neither of them had spoken aloud to another soul in longer than they could say. And each of them, going home afterward to their separate one-chaired firesides, felt the same thing stir, and each of them told themselves the same firm, sensible thing, that they were old, and that this was foolishness, and that whatever this warmth was, it was surely just the ordinary comfort of a friend, and nothing more, and could be nothing more, because love was a young person's business, and that season was 40 years behind them both. Pearl thought it harder than Walter did. She had had 40 years of practice at telling herself love was finished for her. The notion that it might, impossibly, at 60, be knocking again. She pushed it away every time it rose, almost angrily, because to hope for a thing at 60 that you'd long since buried at 20 seemed to her not a gift, but a cruelty, a setting up for one more loss in a life that had already had its share. Better the quiet she knew than the risk of a grief she was too old to survive again. So she might have gone on pushing it away forever, except that Walter Crane, quiet and slow and terrified, finally found his courage first. It was a gold October evening, the kind that smells of wood smoke and turned earth, and Pearl was taking in her wash when she heard a step at her gate and looked up to find Walter standing there in his good coat. His good coat, on a Tuesday, with his hat in his 2 hands, turning it round and round the way a man does when his hands need something to do because his heart is hammering. She had never in 30 years seen Walter Crane look nervous. He looked now like a boy of 17 wearing a man of 63's weathered face. "Pearl," he said, and stopped, and started again. "Mrs. Hartwell, well," he turned the hat. "I've been a long while working up to this, and I'll likely make a mess of it, so I'll just say it plain the way I say most things. He drew a breath. I've grown awful fond of our talks over the fence. More than fond, if I'm honest. And I've never been much good at being anything but honest, even when it'd be easier not to be. His old face colored. I know we're not young. I know what the valley'll say. Two old fools, and us with 1 foot each in the churchyard. I've told myself all of it, every night for a month. And I keep coming back to the same thing, which is that I'm lonely, Pearl, in a way I never knew a person could be. And the only time the loneliness lifts is when I'm standing at that fence, talking to you. He stopped turning the hat. So I came to ask, and I'd be obliged if you'd take your time and not answer too quick, whether you might do me the honor of coming to supper. At my table. Friday, say. A proper supper that I'll cook myself, badly. A small, rueful smile. Not as neighbors trading dishes, as... Well, you know what I'm asking, Pearl. I'm too old to pretend I don't. And Pearl Hartwell stood at her own gate with an armful of wash and 40 years of carefully built peace, and felt the locked door at the center of her shift on its hinges for the first time since Thomas Reed died. Every sensible thing in her rose up to say no. You're 60. You buried this at 20. You've made your peace. Don't be a fool. Don't open a heart that's been safely closed for 40 years just to risk losing one more time. The quiet is safe. The quiet is enough. Say no, kindly, and go back inside to your one chair. She looked at Walter Crane standing there in his good coat, 63 years old, and shaking like a boy, having walked a quarter-mile down a country road to lay his lonely heart bare at her gate, because he could not bear the quiet any more than she could. And she understood, all at once, and with great clarity, that the safe quiet she had guarded for 40 years was not peace at all. It was only fear with the lights turned low. And she was suddenly, fiercely, done being afraid. Walter Crane, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. I have spent 40 years certain that love was a thing that happened to me once and was finished. I have told myself that so long I near believed it. She set down the wash. I would be glad to come to supper, more glad than I have words for. And you needn't cook it badly. I'll come early and we'll cook it together, because I've spent 40 years eating at a table with one chair, and I find I have absolutely no more patience for it. Walter Crane's whole weathered face came open like a window thrown wide. Together, he said, as if it were the finest word in the language. Yes, all right, together. She went to supper that Friday, and they cooked it together in May's old kitchen, and it was not awkward the way they'd both feared. It was easy. The easiest thing either of them had done in years. Two people who had each loved well and lost well, finding, to their amazement, that the heart does not run out of room the way they'd believed. It only goes quiet, waiting, the way a garden goes quiet under snow for a spring it has stopped expecting. They were married the following summer in the little Juniper Hollow church, two gray-headed people standing up before God and a valley that had, in the end, not laughed at all. For there is nothing in this world that softens even the hardest neighbor, like the sight of two lonely old people who have been given, against all expectation, one more chance at joy. Pearl wore a dress the blue of a spring sky, and Walter could not stop looking at her, and the few who'd come expecting to feel sorry for the foolish old couple found themselves weeping instead at the plain, holy stubbornness of love that refuses to know it's too late. They had years together, not the 40 Walter had had with May, nor the lifetime Pearl had once planned with Thomas, but good years, golden years, the sweeter for having been so little expected. 2 chairs drawn up to each fireside now, 2 voices in each house, a garden tended by 4 old hands instead of 2, and every evening of it, Pearl Hartwell Crane gave quiet thanks for the autumn day she had very nearly said no. The day a shaking widower in his good coat had reminded her of the one thing 40 years of careful peace had let her forget: that it is never, at any age, too late. That the heart does not have an expiration on it. That love, when it has passed you by once, and you have buried it and built your whole life over the grave of it, has a way, if you are brave enough, even at 60, to open the door one more time, of coming quietly back up the road of an autumn evening, hat in its hands, to ask you to supper. And the only thing required of you, in the end, is the courage to say yes.